The rain was an absolute whiteout. Ilara Voss gripped the steering wheel of her SUV, her knuckles bone-white against the leather. The Bay Bridge was a maze of slick asphalt and blinding sheets of water, the kind of weather that didn't just make driving difficult, it made it malevolent. She was talking to her sister on the hands-free, recounting a mundane argument with a colleague. Her voice was steady, composed, the voice of a person who dealt in facts and figures, not chaos. The sound that followed was not a crash. It was a shredding, sickening roar. A massive hydroplaning semi-truck appeared in her rearview mirror like a black, unstoppable tide, completely out of control. It struck the guardrail first, peeling the metal back like a sardine can. Then the impact. It was a world-destroying, instantaneous violence that stole the air from her lungs and replaced it with a blinding, searing pain. The car spun, a dizzying, sickening revolution that ended not with a stop, but with a horrifying, stomach-lurching plunge. Ilara wasn't looking at the sky. She was looking at the black, churning water that was rushing up to meet her. The fall felt eternal, a sickening drop that ended with an explosion of shattered glass and a bone-jarring, metallic thud that compressed her spine. The engine died instantly. All power, all lights, all music, gone. The car landed nose first, the passenger side dipping sharply into the freezing, oil-slicked harbor water. The world was now a claustrophobic, deafening dark, punctuated only by the violent, gurgling roar of the water. The first 6 inches of water hit the floorboards with a shock that was worse than the impact. It was the absolute, crushing finality of the realization. I am sinking. Her mind, usually so precise, so sharp, was trying to detonate into 1,000 shards of hysteria. Scream. Panic. Unclip the seatbelt. Where's the door handle? The inner voice, the one that usually governed her every move, was a frantic, useless mess. She could feel the icy water creeping over her shoes, a cold that promised death, not just discomfort. But then another voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud. It was measured. It was surgical. Stop, the voice commanded. Focus. She was pinned by her seatbelt, the automatic locking mechanism seizing in the crash. The water was now lapping at her calves. Seconds. She had only seconds. She remembered the rule, a mantra hammered into her brain from an obscure childhood trauma that had defined her entire adult life. Once the water level passes the bottom of the window, the external pressure becomes a physical, crushing, impossible obstacle. The time to open the door, to roll down the window, to do anything was now. Her fingers, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for the electric window button. She slammed her palm onto the switch. Nothing. The power was dead. The silence mocked her. She tried the door handle, yanking it frantically. It barely budged. Water pressure, even at this shallow depth, was already locking the mechanism. She was trapped in a metal coffin. The panic tried to take her again. It felt like a physical hand around her throat. She closed her eyes. No, not now. Not here. She did the only thing she could do. She applied the protocol. She forced herself to take one slow, deep breath, counting the intake and the exhale. 1, 2, 3. When she opened her eyes, the water was at her knees. She had 4 inches of air left. The adrenaline coursing through her veins had turned her entire body into a rigid, trembling wire. But her mind was now still. She broke the problem down, piece by piece, as she would a complicated financial portfolio. Problem: trapped in a powerless, sinking vehicle. Goal: escape through an opening. Obstacles: seatbelt, water pressure, locked windows/doors. She had to deal with the seatbelt first. She fumbled at the clasp, but the mechanism was jammed, twisted by the crash. She tore at the strap itself, her soft, city hands useless against the reinforced nylon. She needed a tool. She needed a weapon. She remembered the small, bright orange emergency tool, a gift from her overly cautious father, clipped into the center console. She lunged across the center column, the action sending more water sloshing into the car. Her lungs were burning. Her fingers closed around the plastic handle. It was small, no bigger than a cheap pen, with a razor for the seatbelt and a pointed, spring-loaded tip for the window. The water was now at her chest, freezing and suffocating. She found the strap. She positioned the razor and pulled with a desperate downward force. Snap. The belt parted instantly. She was free of the harness. She floated for a single, precious moment. The roof of the car was now only a few feet above the waterline. The external pressure was already enormous, pushing the doors closed with the force of an iron fist. The windows were her only chance. She raised the window breaker. She positioned the sharp, metal tip against the driver's side window, aiming for the corner, the weakest point. This was the moment of commitment. Breaking the window would let the remaining air escape, accelerating the sinking. It was a trade-off, immediate flooding for eventual escape. If she hesitated, the water would rise over her head, and the pressure would become absolutely impossible. She didn't hesitate. She slammed the tool against the glass. Crack. A single devastating sound. The safety glass spiderwebbed but did not fully shatter. She struck it again. Crunch. The glass exploded inward, not in shards, but in a million blunt, granular fragments. The river roared to life. The water surged in, a violent, black torrent that filled the remaining airspace in seconds. She was fully submerged. The sound was deafening, a chaotic, violent symphony of gurgling metal and rushing water. She was tumbling, her arms flailing, the freezing shock constricting her muscles and making her movements clumsy and agonizingly slow. The moment she was fully submerged, her lungs screaming for air, her inner voice took over completely. It was the voice of the protocols. She wasn't panicking because she had faced true, uncontrollable terror before. Ilara was 8 years old, a precocious, energetic child. Her family had a small, shallow above-ground pool. One blistering summer afternoon she was showing off a new trick, holding her breath for a minute, when she got caught in the current of the filter drain. The tiny whirlpool was barely perceptible to an adult, but to a small child, it was a terrifying, irresistible force. She was pinned to the grate, unable to surface, her breath already gone. The panic then was absolute. Blind. Deafening. She thrashed, she clawed, she wasted the last of her energy in a useless, flailing scream that no one could hear underwater. She didn't die that day. Her older brother, who had been watching from the deck, saw her struggle and pulled the plug on the filter. But the aftermath was not a relief. Was a lesson. In the hospital bed, her voice raw, her eyes wide with lingering terror, she spoke to the doctor. "I wasted all my air," she whispered. "I should have pushed off the bottom. I just thrashed." Her father, a former military man who understood the precision of crisis, sat by her side. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered strategy. "Panic is a waste of oxygen and energy," he said, his voice firm. "It's a natural reflex, but it's a killer. The only way to beat it is to separate the actor from the observer. You must learn to observe your fear without acting on it." He didn't enroll her in therapy. He enrolled her in precision training. He taught her advanced breath-holding techniques, not for diving but for controlled stillness. He taught her the physics of water pressure, how a fraction of a second can be the difference between opening a door and remaining sealed inside. This training, which had seemed insane and cruel at the time, was the foundation of her entire life. She learned to find the stillness in the center of the storm. She learned that every crisis had a formula, and that formula began with zero flinch. Back in the submerged SUV, Ilara was in the dark, icy reality of the harbor. The car was fully inverted now, spinning slowly as it sank deeper. She was disoriented, upside down, surrounded by freezing blackness and the remnants of the shattered window. Her focus returned to the singular mission: escape the shell. She had to get out of the window frame. She pushed with her feet, trying to orient herself towards the gap. The freezing temperature was working its way through her clothes, turning her muscles stiff and clumsy. Her mind, however, was running at maximum efficiency, fueled by the decades of internal practice. The roof is now the floor. The window is the hole. Use momentum, not strength. She felt the sharp, jagged edge of the metal frame scrape against her ribs as she pushed through the opening. The impact sent a surge of agonizing, searing pain through her body, a pain that screamed for a reflexive gasp. But the protocol held. She acknowledged the pain, a broken rib, maybe two, and immediately channeled the energy into propulsion. She kicked her feet, propelling her body through the small, unforgiving gap. She was free. She was outside the car, but she was still deep underwater. Blackness surrounded her. She couldn't see the surface, only the faint, diffuse light that filtered through the murky depths. Her chest was an internal explosion. Her lungs were collapsing, demanding air. The instinctive desire to suck in water was the final, most terrifying test. "Ascend slowly," her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Too fast and you risk serious injury. Follow the light." But the light was too far. Her body had been deprived of oxygen for too long. She had to break the rule. She needed air now. She kicked her legs, not frantically but with rhythmic, powerful strokes. She saw the vague, pale glow above her, the sign of the surface. She ascended with all the force she had left, her body screaming against the internal pressure of the held breath. And then, the sound of the water breaking, replaced by the glorious, chaotic roar of the rain and the wind. She gasped. Not a quiet breath, but a racking, violent cough that brought up seawater and bile. But it was air. Life-giving, miraculous air. She was floating in the black, icy water, the remnants of the storm crashing down on her. The car was already a deep, black shadow beneath her. She had survived the fall. She had survived the sinking. Now she had to survive the cold and the tide. Elara kept herself afloat, focusing on a single, fixed point on the churning surface, using minimal energy. She was freezing, shivering so violently her teeth rattled, but her mind remained anchored. She had beaten the panic. She wouldn't let hypothermia steal the victory. The sound of sirens was muted by the storm, but she heard them. Then, the powerful beam of a searchlight cut through the driving rain. A Coast Guard boat, already deployed for the storm, was heading toward the wreckage site. They found her 30 minutes after the crash, floating calmly, holding onto a small, buoyant piece of debris. The 2 Coast Guard petty officers pulled her aboard. She was pale, blue-lipped, and shivering violently. "My name is Elara Voss," she said, her voice surprisingly level despite the physical state of her body. "I broke the driver's side window and escaped immediately. There was no one else in the vehicle." The lead officer, a man named Miller, stared at her. They usually pulled out bodies or traumatized, hysterical survivors who had to be physically restrained. They did not find people who delivered a concise, factual debriefing on their own survival. "You broke the window and got out while it was still sinking?" Miller asked, pulling a thermal blanket around her. "Yes," Elara confirmed, her eyes steady. "Act before water rises. Once the pressure equalizes, you can't escape. I had approximately 10 seconds of effective time. I used the window breaker clipped into the center console. In the emergency room, the doctors diagnosed 2 cracked ribs, severe hypothermia, and multiple contusions. But her brain was clear. Her heart rate was recovering. She was going to live." Her father arrived the next morning. He sat by her bedside, not with tears, but with a profound, quiet pride. "You remembered the rule," he stated, a simple fact. "I remembered the rule," she echoed, clutching the still damp orange window breaker tool that someone had salvaged for her. She didn't tell the doctors or the police about the pool incident. She didn't tell them about the hours she spent as a child, submerged in the bathtub, practicing the stillness. She didn't tell them she had been training for this moment her entire life. Elara had been on the verge of death. She had been subjected to the most violent, terrifying forces of nature and accident. And she had beaten them, not by being physically stronger than the water, but by being mentally stronger than her own fear. In a world full of unpredictable chaos, her protocol was the only thing she truly controlled. When the world threw her a crisis, she didn't flinch. She observed. She calculated. And she survived. She was a reminder that the most essential piece of survival gear is not a tool, but the unbreakable code of conduct you carry in your mind. If Elara's story reminded you that true strength is not the absence of fear, but the control of it, then please hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of extraordinary courage and strategic survival. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that in a moment of crisis, the ability to stay seated in your own mind is the greatest path to victory.